used to believe loyalty would be enough. For 15 years. I stood by Gregory's side through layoffs, hospital visits, late-night anxiety attacks, and even that bankruptcy that nearly wiped us clean. I cooked his meals, managed the house, paid bills when he couldn't, and became stepmother to his teenage daughter who refused to call me anything but that woman. I told myself I was building something, that one day, Gregory would see me not just as a helper, but as a partner, that his daughter, Lily, would see me as family, that this house, his house, would someday feel like mine too. But one Tuesday morning, I found out exactly where I stood. I was in the kitchen, folding Gregory's favorite blue napkins. It was a quiet habit I'd formed, a small ritual that gave me comfort in a home that rarely did. The sun was soft through the window, and I had just set a pot of chamomile tea on the stove when I heard voices from the upstairs hallway. Lily was home from college for spring break, staying the week before her internship started. She didn't know I was up early. She never paid attention to where I was. "Dad," she said, her voice sharp, a little too loud. "You can't keep letting her think this house is hers. She's not, Mom." There was silence. My fingers froze mid-fold. "She's been around forever," Gregory said finally. "She's useful, Lily. She keeps things in order. Useful, like a vacuum cleaner or an electric kettle. She's not going to get anything, right?" Lily pressed. "I mean, the house, your pension, it all goes to me." "Yeah." I couldn't breathe. I leaned against the counter. Gregory chuckled. "Relax. She signed a prenup. She doesn't even know how airtight it is. The house, of it has her name. She's here because it's convenient. That's all. That's all." I don't remember pouring the tea. I don't remember walking back to the table or setting the cup down. I just remember the hum in my ears, the kind that drowns out every sound but the truth. I was never a wife in this house. I was a well-trained guest. I sat at the kitchen table for over an hour, just staring at the steam rising from my untouched tea. The napkins lay unfolded beside me, a stack of soft blue linen that suddenly felt absurd, like props in a play where I wasn't even cast. Convenient, useful, not in the will, not in the family. 15 years, and I'd been reduced to a footnote in someone else's legacy. A caretaker with no title. A fixture in a house where every photo frame still held Lily's late mother's face, and none of mine. I didn't cry, not at first. I just went through the motions. That day made breakfast, washed the dishes, refilled the bird feeder in the garden like I always did on Tuesdays. Gregory came downstairs wearing his usual slacks and sweater vests, nodding at me, like he always did. Lily breezed past me without so much as a glance. She had plans to meet friends in town, and was too busy deciding between 2 shades of lip gloss to notice the way my hands were shaking as I handed her coffee. Gregory sipped his tea and grunted. "Too much honey today," he muttered. I looked at him across the table, taking in the thinning hair, the deep creases around his mouth, the little habits I once found endearing. He looked up, expecting an apology. "I'll make a fresh pot," I said instead, my voice level, my smile fixed, the same way I always did, the way he liked. But something inside me had shifted, irreversibly. That evening, when they were both out, Gregory, at his Thursday night poker game, Lily off to dinner with friends, I stood in the hallway, staring at the mirror near the coat rack. I hadn't looked at myself properly in weeks, months, maybe. The woman who stared back looked faded. I used to be vibrant. I used to wear soft pink lipstick and dance to Billie Holiday on Sunday mornings while cleaning. I used to write poetry in my notebook, back when I believed words could heal. I used to have dinner parties, read historical novels, grow lavender in pots on my old apartment balcony. That woman had dreams. That woman had friends. That woman had a voice. And now I was a silent silhouette who padded from room to room, making sure the floors were clean and the laundry folded. I opened the drawer in the hallway chest where I kept old keys and light bulbs and rubber bands. Beneath it all, I found the file, the one labeled prenuptial agreement. I had never read it, not fully. I trusted him. When we got married, he said it was just a formality, a protective measure in case of emergency. I was 45 at the time, divorced for 3 years, with a small apartment and a smaller savings account. Gregory had a house, a teenage daughter, and a lawyer friend who insisted we handle things properly. I skimmed the document, my eyes tripping over phrases like separate property, irrevocable trust, non-marital assets. I felt like I was reading the blueprint of my own ERAs. It was all there, ironclad. I had nothing. No claim to the house, the accounts, the vacation property upstate, the antique car he inherited from his father. Not even the pension plan that I'd helped manage for years, tracking contributions and reminding him of deadlines. I should have seen it coming. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside him in bed, listening to his steady breathing, watching the red glow of the alarm clock cast faint shadows across the ceiling. My body ached not from work, but from years of carrying the weight of silence, of shrinking so others could expand. I thought about the first time we met. He was charming, attentive, a widower who spoke with tenderness about his late wife and desperation about raising Lily alone. I'd been flattered when he called me his rock just 6 months into dating. He said I grounded him, that I was what he needed to feel normal again. Back then, I didn't realize that normal to Gregory meant someone who'd never questioned him, someone who'd do all the emotional labor without needing anything in return. The next morning, I woke up before him. I slipped out of bed, made coffee, and stared out the window at the bare branches of the oak tree in our backyard. Winter had been especially harsh this year. The leaves had long since fallen, and the limbs looked skeletal against the dull gray sky. I felt like that tree, stripped down, exposed, but even trees, given time, bloom again. I pulled out my old journal. It had been tucked away in the bottom of my nightstand drawer, buried beneath unused candles and lotion bottles I received as gifts and never opened. The first few pages were from before I met Gregory, reflections on my first marriage. Poems, grocery lists, half-written letters to myself. I flipped to a clean page and wrote one sentence in big, block letters. I deserve to belong somewhere. Then, I made a list. Not of chores or errands, but of things that made me feel alive. Lavender candles, warm bread, Nina Simone's voice on a rainy afternoon, writing with a good pen, reading by the window, late-night phone calls with my sister, silence that felt like peace, not punishment. I underlined the last one. Then, slowly, deliberately, I began to imagine what it would look like to live somewhere that belonged to me, a space where I could breathe, where I could wake up and not feel like I had to earn the right to be there. The thought was terrifying and electrifying. Gregory came down the stairs at 9, rubbing his eyes and asking about breakfast. I made it, of course, bacon, eggs, toast, just the way he liked. I said nothing about the conversation I'd overheard, nothing about the document I'd read. I needed time. I needed a plan, but something must have shown on my face, because just before he took his first bite, he looked up at me and said, "Everything okay?" I smiled. The same polite smile I'd perfected over 15 years. "Everything's just fine," I said, buttering my toast with slow, deliberate strokes. But inside a voice whispered something new, something I hadn't heard in a long time. Not for long. The next few weeks passed in a blur of carefully measured silence. I played my part so well, even I started to forget I was performing. Gregory didn't notice. He never did. As long as the laundry was done and the coffee was hot, I could have been anyone. I began to gather small things quietly, methodically. I opened a new bank account in my name only, at a credit union across town. I redirected what little freelance proofreading work I still did into that account. It wasn't much, just a few dollars here and there, editing college admissions essays and blog posts, but it was mine, and that made it sacred. Next, I started spending afternoons at the public library. I told Gregory I was volunteering, helping reshelve books for the community. He nodded, distracted, barely hearing me as he scrolled through the news on his tablet. Lily didn't care either. She thought anything I did that kept me out of her way was a blessing. At the library, I did more than I researched. I read stories of women who had walked away from long, quiet betrayals, some older than me, some younger, all of them with that same flicker of recognition in their eyes when they spoke about waking up one day and realizing they'd vanished inside someone else's life. I found an online community of late-life divorcees. They called themselves the Phoenix Circle. The name alone gave me chills. Some posted legal advice, others offered emotional support. One woman, her screen name was rewritten at 6'2", wrote, "You're not selfish for wanting to be visible. You're human. You deserve to take up space." I read that line a dozen times. I copied it into my journal. I underlined it 3 times. One evening, while Gregory was out grocery shopping, something he only did when his preferred snacks ran out, opened his desk drawer. I knew the key to the locked file cabinet was taped underneath. That's how I'd found the prenup. I opened the drawer and found what I expected: tax documents, insurance policies, bank statements. But one thing stopped me cold. It was a handwritten note, folded 3 times, with Lily's handwriting on the outside, just in case she ever tries anything. Inside were bullet points. A list of every financial account in Gregory's name, the value of the house, the equity from the lake cabin he had sold 2 years ago, and even a reference to an off-the-books cash stash he kept in a gun safe in the garage. It wasn't just information. It was a map of exclusion, a contingency plan, a quiet, malicious effort to ensure I stayed exactly where they wanted me, powerless. I sat back in the leather chair, the paper still in my hand, heart pounding. All this time, I'd thought Lily simply resented me because I wasn't her mother. But this wasn't grief. This was strategy. And Gregory? He was complicit, either by approval or apathy. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. The slow drip kind. The kind that says, if you wait too long, you'll wake up at 70. Still invisible, still explaining your presence in someone else's home. The next morning, I called my sister Nadine. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Well, this is a surprise, she said, cheerful but cautious. We hadn't talked properly in years. Not because we were angry, just to sit. I'd pulled away, embarrassed by how little I had to say about my life. You can only say nothings, new so many times before the silence becomes habit. I need a place to stay for a few days, I said, barely able to get the words out. She paused. Of course. Are you okay? No, I whispered. But I'm going to be. She didn't ask for details. She just gave me the code to her gate, told me which room had fresh linens, and said she'd put some soup on the stove. That was Nadine. Straightforward, solid. I packed 2 suitcases, one with clothes, the other with notebooks, photos, and everything from my old life I wanted to take with me. I left behind the crystal vases Gregory's mother had gifted us, the embroidered pillows that matched the living room curtains, the dinnerware Lily had picked out last Christmas. They weren't mine. They never were. As I zipped the last bag shut, Gregory came home early. He looked at the suitcase on the floor, then at me. What's this? I met his eyes and held them. For once, I didn't look away. I'm leaving, I said simply. His eyebrows drew together, his voice sharp. Leaving? For where? To start over? That's ridiculous, he snapped. You've got everything you need here. A home, stability. What are you even talking about? A home I'm not in the will for, I said quietly. A life where I'm convenient, but not valued. You said so yourself. His mouth opened, then closed. You were eavesdropping. No, I was finally listening. He scoffed. You're overreacting. You've been treated with respect. I cut him off. No, I've been tolerated. And there's a difference. He raised his voice. You're walking away from everything we've built. We didn't build anything, I replied, calm as still water. You handed me blueprints from your old life and asked me to paint the walls. That's not a partnership, Gregory. That's set dressing. He was speechless. I didn't wait for him to find words that would twist things into another. Apology dash without dash accountability. I wheeled my suitcase down the front steps, one hand steadying the railing. The air smelled like coming rain, sharp, almost electrifying. I looked back once. Gregory stood in the doorway, still in his slippers, arms crossed, stunned. I didn't say goodbye. He never earned it. Nadine's house sat at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac, lined with oak trees whose branches arched over the street like guardians. Her porch light was already on when I pulled into the driveway. As I stepped out of the car, the weight of everything I'd carried for the last 15 years, the obligation, the silence, the desperation to belong, seemed to lift just a little. The door opened before I could knock. There she is, Nadine said, arms wide. Get in here before I get emotional. Her hug was firm, like she was trying to hold me together. I didn't cry, not then. I was still too numb. But something inside me softened, like ice warming under gentle sun. The guest room was small but warm. Pale yellow walls, a handmade quilt on the bed, and a window that looked out onto a little herb garden. On the nightstand was a lamp and a small ceramic dish of peppermints. Nadine had thought of everything. She always did. She didn't press me that night, just heated up the lentil soup she promised, toasted a few slices of sourdough, and set the table for 2 like we'd done 1,000 times growing up. Over dinner, we talked about safe things, weather, old neighbors, how her gardenia had finally bloomed after 3 stubborn years. Every now and then, she'd glance at me, her expression gentle, patient, waiting for the moment I was ready. It came later, when we were sitting on the back porch, each with a cup of mint tea, watching moths gather near the porch light. I listened to him talk about me like I was a free housekeeper. I finally said, my voice was low, even, he told Lily everything was hers, that I was useful, nothing more. Nadine didn't flinch. She just reached over and took my hand. I read the prenup. I wasn't even listed as a beneficiary on anything. Not the house, not the accounts, not even an emergency contact form. Still, she said nothing. Just let me speak. I gave up my apartment, my independence, my career. I made peace with not having children of my own because I thought I'd be part of something, a family, but I was never anything more than ... optional. Nadine's voice was steady when she finally spoke. You weren't optional. You were used. And it's okay to be angry about that. I shook my head slowly. I'm not angry. Not exactly. I'm grieving, not just for the marriage but for the version of me who believed she didn't deserve more. A long silence stretched between us. Then maybe now's the time to meet the version of you who does, Nadine said softly. That night, I wrote in my journal until almost 2 a.m. I wrote about the nights I made dinner, only to be told it wasn't the same as his late wife's. I wrote about Lily rolling her eyes when I offered to help her with college applications. I wrote about birthdays, skipped, apologies that never came, and all the quiet compromises that added up until I could no longer recognize myself. I wrote and wrote until my hand cramped, and in the final line, I wrote, if I don't rebuild my life now, I'll never find the woman I used to be and I'll never get to meet the one I was supposed to become. The next morning, Nadine handed me a stack of local resources she'd printed out: women's legal centers, career re-entry programs, adult education classes, and almost shyly a flyer for a local writing workshop that met Thursday nights at the community center. I thought of you the minute I saw this, she said. You used to write, remember? Your poems were always a little too heavy for high school, but they were beautiful. I laughed. A real one. It startled me. I haven't written anything real in years, I said. Well, she said with a shrug. Maybe it's time. I spent that afternoon walking around the neighborhood, just breathing in the air. It smelled like jasmine and warm pavement. I passed kids on bikes, a man mowing his lawn, a woman painting her mailbox. Ordinary things, but it all felt extraordinary, like I'd entered a different world simply by stepping out of the one that had suffocated me for so long. Back at Nadine's, I opened my laptop and typed 4 words into the search bar: divorce lawyer for women. Just seeing those words on the screen felt radical, like naming something gave me back some of its power. I filled out a contact form for a women-run law firm called Silver and Grace. Their website had a quote across the homepage: "It's not revenge, it's reclamation." That hit me like a truth I didn't know I was waiting to hear. That evening, Nadine and I made spaghetti and watched an old episode of The Golden Girls. At one point, she paused it, turned to me, and said, "You know what the bravest part is?" I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't wait for someone to rescue you. You rescued yourself." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had gone tight again. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, I realized something strange. I felt calm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath in my own home. There was no one to tiptoe around. No invisible scorecard tallying what I had or hadn't done. Just air. Just stillness. Just me. And maybe that was the first real taste of freedom. The first meeting with Silver and Grace was virtual. Nadine offered to sit in, but I asked her to give me the room. I needed to do this on my own. The attorney's name was Mara. She was in her 40s. Confident, but calm, with the kind of eyes that made you feel like nothing you were about to say would surprise her. I told her everything, not just about the prenup, or the years of unpaid caregiving, or the exclusion from every financial document. I told her about the way Gregory always turned things into jokes when I voiced concerns, about how Lily treated me like furniture and he let her, about the weight of pretending not to notice I was disappearing one task at a time. When I finished, Mara leaned forward. Her voice firm but kind. "You are not the first woman to sit in that chair and tell me this story," she said. "But you are the only one who can decide what happens next." I exhaled slowly. "The prenup makes it complicated," I admitted, "and I don't want this to be about revenge. I just want ... enough. A way to land on my feet." She nodded. Then we'd start by finding your legal footing. She explained that California was a community property state. Even with a prenup, there were potential exceptions, especially if I could prove I contributed labor that enabled Gregory to build or preserve wealth. She used terms like constructive trust and marital economic partnership that made my head spin, but also gave me something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Let me be clear, Mara said near the end of the call. You are not asking for charity, you are asking for recognition, for what you've already earned. Those words stayed with me long after the meeting ended. That night, I walked into Nadine's kitchen and found her at the counter, slicing up peaches for a cobbler. She looked up and saw something in my face. You look different, she said. I smiled softly. I just realized, I'm not lost. I've just been navigating by someone else's map. She handed me a slice of peach. Then it's time to draw your own. Thursday night came, and I showed up at the writing workshop with my journal clutched in one hand and a knot of nerves in the other. It was held in a multi-purpose room at the community center. Plastic chairs, a whiteboard with dried-out markers, the faint smell of copier paper, and someone's overly floral hand cream. There were about 10 of us. Most were women over 50. A few were younger. Everyone looked nervous. Everyone looked like they had something to say. The instructor, Elise, was a poet with graying curls and thick glasses. She welcomed us with a smile and said, "You don't have to be a writer to belong here, you just have to have lived." Then she handed out slips of paper with the evening's prompt. Write the first time you realized something was not okay and you stayed anyway. The room went quiet, pens scratched, fingers hovered over keyboards, eyes stared at ceilings. I stared at the paper for a long time before I wrote anything. Then the words came, slow but certain. The first time I knew something was wrong. He called me by his late wife's name during an argument. I laughed it off, said it was just stress. He didn't even apologize, and I stayed. The second time, he told me Lily's cruelty was just a phase. She was The third time, he said, you knew what this was. You just hoped it would change, and I stayed. By the end of the session, Elise asked if anyone wanted to read aloud. A few women did. Their stories cracked the air, open stories of quiet betrayals, lost identities, and the long road back to self. I didn't speak that first night, but I listened, and when I walked out into the parking lot under a sky dusted with stars, I felt something new stirring in my chest. Not rage, not sadness. Voice. The next morning, I received an email from Mara. She'd reviewed Gregory's public property records and found 2 transactions made during our marriage that weren't covered under the prenup: refinancing the house and transferring ownership of the lake property temporarily to his name alone, then back. That opens the door, she wrote. Not a wide one, but wide enough to walk through if you're willing. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, I hit reply. I'm ready. I closed the laptop and looked out the kitchen window at Nadine's garden, where marigolds were blooming in fat orange tufts, for the first time in years. I felt like I could breathe deeply without choking on someone else's expectations. That night, I sat with my journal and made a list titled, Things I Get to Choose Now. I wrote, where I live, what I do with my time, what I eat for dinner, who gets to know me, who never gets to treat me like furniture. A gunny. Underlined the last one. Then I added one more, me. I get to choose me. The official paperwork arrived a week later. I held the manila envelope in both hands, my fingers trembling only slightly as I peeled back the seal. Inside was a neatly printed petition for legal separation, prepared by Mara's firm. My name in bold letters, alongside Gregory's, filed under irreconcilable differences. Simple, clean, honest. I read every word. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just signed. After I dropped it off at the county clerk's office, I walked 2 blocks to a small cafe Nadine had told me about. It was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of conversation and the clink of coffee cups. I ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window, watching the traffic go by. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I felt like a person again, not a fixture, not a duty, not a ghost with chores. Just me. I texted Nadine, filed, it's real now. She responded almost immediately, you just saved your own life. Coffee's on me tonight. Gregory didn't take it well. I received his first message 3 days later. Cold, short, sharp. What is this nonsense? Are you seriously dragging our private matters through court? I didn't answer. An hour later, a second one came. Don't be dramatic. You're not getting anything. You know that. It's all protected. You're just embarrassing yourself. Still, I said nothing. That silence. It used to be my prison. Now, it was my power. That weekend, Mara called. His lawyer sent over a response. She said, "They're already trying to claim you contributed nothing and knew what you were, agreeing to when you signed the pre." I felt a flicker of heat rise in my chest. "Then they'll love the records I've been keeping," I said, because I had started gathering everything: calendar reminders of doctor appointments I arranged, receipts for medications I picked up with my own money, old emails confirming I'd handled property tax submissions, even handwritten grocery lists Gregory had left me, always signed with a smug, "You're a lifesaver." Turns out, when you've been invisible long enough, your paper trail is a map to proof. Mara chuckled. "They're not expecting you to fight. Then they're in for a surprise," I said, voice flat but unwavering. Lily showed up 2 weeks later. I was alone at Nadine's. Nadine had gone out to run errands, and I heard the car pull up before I saw her, a sleek gray sedan with a vanity plate that read L1 Libloom. She stepped out, sunglasses on, phone in hand, designer purse slung over one shoulder. She rang the bell like she was ordering room service. I opened the door slowly, not surprised, but not particularly interested either. "I just need 5 minutes," she said, already pushing past me into the living room. I closed the door behind her, quietly, deliberately. She turned to me, lips tight. "Why are you doing this?" she snapped. "You've been living off my father for years, and now you want to take his money." After blinked, then smiled, the kind of smile I'd learned to weaponize, when politeness was the only shield I had. "I didn't live off your father, Lily. I lived with him. And while he was building trust funds and hiding documents, I was making sure he didn't choke in his sleep or bleed out on the kitchen tile." Her nostrils flared. "You're bitter." "No, I'm done." She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "And if your concern is inheritance, don't worry. You'll still get everything. All I'm asking for is what I've already given and never been paid for. You don't deserve a dime." "Maybe," I said, stepping closer, my voice calm. "But deserve has nothing to do with it anymore. This is legal, and it's happening." She stared at me, like she couldn't comprehend who I'd become. As if I'd been a vase on a shelf all this time, and suddenly it had spoken. "I'll see you in court," she spat. "No, you won't," I replied, stepping aside to open the door. "Because this isn't about you, and you're not invited." She stormed out. The door clicked shut behind her like punctuation at the end of a chapter. I stood still for a moment. Then, without warning, I started to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was freeing. The version of me she'd known, the one who apologized for her presence and tiptoed around dinner tables, was long gone, and she didn't know what to do with the one who replaced her. The next Thursday at the writing workshop, Elise handed out a new prompt: "Write the moment you realized you weren't who they said you were." This time, I didn't hesitate. I wrote, "They said I was lucky to be in their life, that I was being kept, that I had it easy, but the truth is I kept them. I kept the house clean. I kept the schedule. I kept the peace. And when I stopped keeping those things, everything fell apart." Which tells me exactly who was holding it all together. Me. When I finished reading it aloud, the room went quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then everyone. And I felt something rise in me that I hadn't felt in so long. Pride. Not for being obedient, not for being patient, but for finally telling the truth. The morning of the hearing, I wore navy. Not because I wanted to look severe or somber, but because it was the same color I used to wear when I still worked full-time, back when I felt capable, necessary, and visible. The blazer was a little snug now, but it still fit, like a second skin I had shed too soon, now reclaimed. Nadine offered to drive me to the courthouse. We didn't talk much on the way. She knew I needed the silence, needed to steady my breathing, needed to be with my own thoughts. Mara was already waiting by the entrance. She gave me a firm nod. "You're ready?" she said simply. I nodded. Yes. Gregory was seated at the other end of the courtroom when we entered. His hair was freshly cut, his suit pressed. He looked like he was auditioning for sympathy, like some aging widower betrayed by the housekeeper who got too big for her role. But his eyes told a different story. He wasn't confused, he was furious. We didn't exchange words. We didn't have to. The judge was a woman, late 50s, efficient, no nonsense. She reviewed the files in silence, only pausing occasionally to make notes. Mara spoke first. laying out a timeline of unpaid labor, caregiver responsibilities, and economic contributions that fell outside the prenup's narrow clauses. She didn't dramatize, she didn't beg, she simply laid out facts: years of medical support, personal financial expenses, and a life built around one-sided sacrifice. Gregory's lawyer followed with what sounded like a canned rebuttal. My client provided housing, stability, and consistent financial coverage. Ms. Lee was aware of the prenup and willingly entered into the agreement. There is no legal basis for asset division. Then Mara stood again and read from a handwritten note I'd given her the night before. Just one paragraph. Being housed is not the same as being respected. I was not a tenant. I was not a guest. I was a wife, and I upheld every part of that role, even when it was lonely, invisible, and unreciprocated. I am not asking to be compensated for love. I am asking to be acknowledged for labor that kept a man, a household, and a legacy intact. While mine was systematically erased, the courtroom was quiet. The judge adjusted her glasses, then spoke in a calm but firm tone. I find that while the prenuptial agreement does restrict asset division in certain areas, the plaintiff's role as a long-term caregiver and domestic contributor constitutes a claim for equitable relief. Then she looked at Gregory. Mr. Lowell, you benefited economically and personally from Ms. Lee's unpaid labor that has legal weight. She turned back to Mara. Submit the final financial disclosures within 10 days. I'm issuing a preliminary ruling for partial spousal support and access to any jointly utilized accounts during the marriage. Mara bowed her head slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. Gregory stood abruptly, his face flushed red. This is a joke, he muttered. She's playing victim. The judge didn't even look up. You may sit down, Mr. Lowell. But I didn't look at him. I looked straight ahead, not because I was ignoring him, but because I no longer needed anything from that direction. Not an apology, not a reaction, not even acknowledgement. It was done. When we stepped outside into the sun, I felt light, not triumphant, not smug, just clean, like someone had wiped a thick layer of fog from the windows of my life. And for the first time in years, I could see clearly. Nadine hugged me so tight I thought my spine might snap. You did it, she whispered. No, I said, exhaling. I finally stopped doing everything for everyone else. That weekend, I returned to the writing group. We sat in a circle, and Elise gave us a new prompt. Write the version of yourself that would terrify the people who underestimated you. This time, I didn't need to think. I wrote. She reads contracts now. She says no without explaining. She drinks wine alone and doesn't call it lonely. She doesn't whisper in her own house. She lets her phone ring. She leaves when the room grows small. And when they ask what changed, she says, I remembered I was never theirs to keep. When I finished reading, the room was silent again, but it was the good kind of silence, the kind that follows truth. Afterward, a woman I'd never spoken to, small, silver-haired, maybe 70, came over and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Needed to hear that, she said. My husband died 3 years ago, but I'm still trying to leave the marriage. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. Then this might be your beginning, I whispered, and she smiled back, because she understood, because we always do. 1 week after the hearing, I moved into a small apartment above a used bookstore on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 600 square feet, sloped ceilings, and a stubborn radiator that clanged in the middle of the night, but it was mine. There was no shadow of Gregory in the doorways, no cold silence waiting in the kitchen, just empty space, filled with possibility. I painted the walls pale sage, the same color as the sunroom in my first apartment before I married anyone. I hung 3 framed prints over the desk: a woman holding her own heart, a single sunflower growing from a cracked sidewalk, and a quiet quote that read, You do not owe the fire your ashes. That first night, I cooked dinner just for myself. Nothing elaborate, just roasted sweet potatoes, garlic, lemon, broccoli, and a glass of red wine. I set the table for one. Not in sadness, in honor. Afterward, I opened my laptop and checked my email. Mara had forwarded me the finalized terms from the judge's ruling: a fair financial settlement, modest spousal support, and perhaps most validating of all, a formal recognition of my years of unpaid labor as domestic contribution. No more begging for acknowledgement. The system, however flawed, had seen me. I closed the email and clicked on another tab, my writing blog. It was still new, still raw, just a few posts about identity, middle age, and rediscovery. I had titled it House of Her Own, not because I owned property, but because, for the first time, I owned myself. That night, I published a post titled, 10 Things I Took With Me When I Left. I wrote, my grandmother's necklace, a cast iron skillet older than my last name, my journal, the ability to make soup from anything, quiet resilience, my favorite penna, folder labeled proof I was there, the voice I had buried in the laundry, the softness that survived anyway, the courage to leave before I vanished completely by morning. The post had 27 comments, some from strangers, some from women in places just like the one I'd crawled out of. One comment read, I read this with tears in my eyes. I'm packing tonight. Thank you for showing me it's not too late. I sat with my tea and let that comment wash over me. Maybe I couldn't undo the years I'd lost, but I could make sure someone else didn't lose theirs. A few weeks later, I began teaching a small class at the library, writing for renewal. It was unpaid, but that didn't matter. Women showed up week after week, journals in hand, nervous smiles on their faces. We wrote about silence. We wrote about sacrifice. We wrote about the day we stopped apologizing for surviving. In that room, I saw pieces of myself in every story, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt rooted. Then, one afternoon, as I was setting up the projector for class, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. The text was short. Dad's in the hospital. Stroke. I see you. You're listed as emergency contact. Can you come? It was from Lily. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't pound. I simply turned the phone face down and finished setting up for class. Afterward, I called Mara. She handled the legal removal of my name from all medical contact forms. No ceremony, just closure. That night, I sat on my fire escape with a blanket over my knees, watching the city glow under a lavender dusk. Cars moved slowly below. Somewhere, a dog barked. Across the alley, someone laughed, and I realized I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt released. Whatever happened to Gregory was no longer mine to carry. He had built a life that excluded me, and now, I was building one that didn't include him. At the next writing group, Elise passed out one final prompt before we broke for summer. Write what freedom tastes like. I wrote, like burnt toast I made myself. Like wine I didn't ask permission to pour. Like silence that isn't punishment. Like mornings without anyone watching me wake up. Like the first deep breath after stepping outside someone else's house and realizing this sky belongs to me, too. When I read it aloud, I didn't cry, but the woman beside me did. She reached over, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Thank you for not going back." I squeezed back. Me too. By the time autumn rolled in, the trees outside my apartment were burning amber and rust, and I had finally stopped waking up with the instinct to ask anyone what they needed from me. I moved through my days with a quiet rhythm, mornings spent editing for small online publishers, afternoons teaching workshops, evenings with a book or a bowl of pasta, or a new post on my blog. My life didn't look like success to the outside world. No big house, no shiny car, no hand to hold in public, but to me, it felt like sovereignty. I belonged to myself. One Saturday, Nadine stopped by unannounced. She brought apple cider donuts and a handful of old photos she'd dug out from her garage. "Do you remember this?" She laughed, handing me a sun-bleached picture of us from our 20s, sunburned, laughing, sitting on the hood of my first car. "God, you used to be fearless." I smiled, tracing the edge of the photo. "I'm starting to feel like her again." She looked at me for a long time, then said something that stayed with me. "I don't think you became someone new. I think you finally stopped hiding the version of you that was always there." Later that night, I pulled out an old journal and reread some of the first pages I'd written after leaving Gregory. The grief was still there, still raw, but it didn't consume me the way it once had. Grief, I realized, wasn't just about mourning the people we lose. It was also about mourning the pieces of ourselves we gave away for free. One evening, I received a letter, not an email, an actual letter, handwritten on ivory stationery with Gregory's familiar, formal script. It read, "I suppose you got what you wanted. Dylan refuses to speak to me. Lily doesn't visit unless there's a check involved. The house is quiet, too quiet. I keep thinking about the muffins you used to bake on Sundays, the way you folded my sweaters just right, The way you always knew what kind of soup I wanted when I was sick. I never said thank you. I don't expect you to respond. But I want you to know. I noticed. Too late, maybe. But I did. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my desk drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but because I wanted to remind myself of something important: recognition. After damage is not redemption. It's a shadow of what should have been, and shadows, no matter how long they stretch, cannot warm a room. In November, I was invited to speak on a podcast for women rebuilding after long-term relationships. It wasn't a huge platform, just a local show, but the host had read my blog and wanted me to talk about late life agency. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a therapist. I wasn't a coach. I didn't have letters after my name or a best-selling memoir. But then I remembered what I had: a story, one I had lived, clawed through, and come out of whole. So I said yes. We recorded in a small studio, just 2 mics and a warm cup of tea between us. The host asked, "What would you tell the woman who's sitting on her porch right now, wondering if it's too late to choose herself?" I didn't have to think. I'd tell her this: you are not too old, you are not too far gone. You are not being ungrateful or unreasonable for wanting peace, respect, and your own damn name on the mailbox. You have time, but you don't have to waste another second proving your worth to people who've already decided you're a tool, not a person. She blinked, then smiled. "We're going to put that on a t-shirt." We both laughed, but part of me wasn't joking, because that was the line that had saved me. The night the episode aired, I received over 100 messages, emails, blog comments, even a few handwritten notes mailed to the library, where I taught. Most of them started the same way: "I thought I was the only one." But we never are we? That's the lie they feed us, to keep us small, silent, and isolated. But the truth is, once you speak, you start to echo. And once you echo, you start to build a chorus. And that chorus becomes a movement. And that movement becomes a home. A house someone else built. Not a family that you're constantly auditioning for, but a place inside you that no one gets to enter unless they come with care, respect, and real hands, not empty ones. It took me 60 years to find that place, but I did, and now I guard its door like my life depends on it, because it does. Winter came gently that year. Snow dusted the rooftops like powdered sugar. The windows in my little apartment fogged up each morning from the steam of my kettle. And for once, the cold didn't feel like loneliness, it felt like rest. I decorated for the holidays with quiet joy: a tiny tree from the farmer's market, a string of warm white lights hung across my windows, a single ornament I had kept from long ago, an acorn made of clay, painted by my niece when she was 5. That was enough. I didn't need grandeur, just intention. Nadine came over for Christmas Eve. We roasted vegetables, made mulled wine, and stayed up too late watching old Cary Grant movies in our pajamas. Somewhere between laughter and stories, she turned to me and said, "You know, you're the happiest I've ever seen you." I thought about it for a moment before answering. I'm not sure I'd call it happiness, but I think I've found peace, and that's deeper. She smiled. That's rarer, too. A few days into the new year, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a copy of a book I had loved in college. The woman upstairs, with a short note, written on a torn scrap of legal pad paper, "Saw this and thought of you. Still rooting for you. Mara." I pressed the book to my chest for a moment, then placed it on the shelf above my desk, where I kept the titles that had saved me over the years. I had come to realize something about people like Mara. They weren't just lawyers or professionals. They were lantern holders for women like me, not leading the way, but lighting it just enough for us to take the first few steps on our own. That spring, I applied for a community grant to expand the Writing for Renewal program. It was funded, not a large amount, but enough to turn one class into 4. We rented a bigger space at the library, added guest speakers, bought better chairs. Women of all ages came, divorced, widowed, never married, newly brave, still trembling. Some whispered when they read their work aloud. Others didn't speak at all for the first 3 sessions, but by week 6, everyone was writing, and I sat in the back sometimes, just listening, just watching, because I had learned this truth: healing doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it's a slow blooming dot. Sometimes it's the quiet click of a woman opening a door she thought was locked forever. One afternoon, I ran into Lily. That it was at the grocery store. I was browsing the tea aisle. She came around the corner, and for a second, neither of us moved. She looked thinner, older, her face drawn in a way grief carves without permission. She nodded slightly. "Hi," I returned it. "Hi." There was a long pause before she said, "I read your blog. Someone sent it to me. I didn't know you could write like that." "I didn't know either," I said softly. Another silence. Then she said, "He passed 2 months ago. I didn't think to tell you." "I know," I replied. She looked at me for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, "I was angry for it. Years. Thought you were trying to replace her. My mom. But I think I understand now. You weren't trying to be her. You were just trying to be seen." I gave a small, sad smile. "We all are, Lily. Every one of us." She nodded again. Then, almost apologetically, said, "I'm sorry. I didn't say I forgave her. Because it wasn't about that anymore. I simply said, 'Take care of yourself,' and walked away. And that, too, was closure. Now, I wake up most mornings before the sun. I light a candle, pour a cup of tea, sit by the window, and write for 30 minutes before the world demands anything from me. I still keep the old journal, and on the last page, I recently added this: I am not the woman who stayed, I am the woman who left. And in leaving, I became someone worth staying for. I don't know if I'll ever fall in love again, but I know this: I have become the love I was always waiting for. My story isn't tragic. It's not revenge. It's not survival. It's return. It's return. To myself. To breath. To space. To light. To the woman who once got lost in someone else's story and finally began writing her own.